Some people believe there is a city under the pavements of Edinburgh, a dark, mysterious, forgotten place. They say it is a metropolis, that miles of streets and houses exist down there, banished forever from the light. Others claim there is no underground city, that the town below the grounds isn't real. It's a fairy tale, no more than a legend. The truth, in fact, is somewhere in between. There is an underground city. It is a near mythical place, but it does exist, and you can find it if you know where to look. Edinburgh is an impressive city. The towering spires and ancient buildings of the old town are a constant feast for the eye. With so much beauty and history on display, it does not occur to many visitors that there might be anything of great interest under their feet. The same is true of Edinburgh's own inhabitants. Residents often have only a vague historical knowledge of the town where they live. Ask a cross-section of the local population about the underground city, and you will get an astonishing array of answers. In Edinburgh's case, however, the citizens have a good reason for their lack of information, as throughout its history, the city has been plagued by pillaging invaders and devastating fires, as this has destroyed many records and archives. There is no doubt that the legend of an underground city has been part of Edinburgh's lore for as long as anyone can remember. I first heard of it only a few years ago, and like so many living in the city, I had no idea what it was or even if it really existed. The same was true of everyone I asked. I talked to retired citizens who had spent their lives in Edinburgh. Many have been told stories of city below the streets when they were children, but they were still unsure or in what form that city actually was. The intrigue surrounding this mythical place has a far greater scope than I imagined. So in this series of videos, I want to explore the idea there was a city under the streets of Scotland's capital, to explore what the underground city actually was, how it came about and where it can still be found. These tales stretch across the centuries, from the city's founding to the present day. They include fables, urban legends, and some pretty astonishing facts. Where possible, I have tried to separate truth from invention, but the truth, of course, has turned out to be a far stranger. There has been some sort of settlement on the site of Edinburgh since prehistoric times, and it's not hard to see why. Anyone who has witnessed the next-training splendour of Edinburgh Castle will testify that it's a superb defensive position. Castle Rock was a focal point of old Edinburgh and has been the site of some sort of fortress since the Roman times. The first recorded settlers around 2,000 years ago were a tribe called the Votadini, a Roman name. They were also called the Godonin, who lived on the ridge running around the Castle Rock. This area, now known as the Royal Mile or High Street, this ridge towered over the surrounding meadows and was easy to defend, which made it an ideal spot for the settlement to grow. The rock and ridge formation that provided a haven for the first settlers is a geological structure called the Crag and Tail. The crag is a volcanic branch, one of the outlet valves for the extinct volcano that formed Arthur's Seat. During the last ice age, the basalt strata that formed at Castle Rock was too hard to be eroded by advancing glaciers. A ridge of much softer sandstone, the Tail, also survived as it was shielded from the ice by the basalt crag. Once a fort was established at the towering crag, houses could be safely built on the Tail, as any attacker would have an uphill struggle to overrun the settlement. If any invaders had succeeded in taking the ridge, then the defenders simply retreated into the fort and continued to fight. But this high ridge of soft sandstone also gave Edinburgh a unique quality that other cities simply do not have. One that was not considered by its citizens at first. You could dig into it and have an underground city. In the early days of the city's evolution, there was no need for anyone to live underground. A combination of natural hardship, English invasion, and the occasional deadly pestilence kept the population to an acceptable level, and there was plenty of room for everyone. Houses spread eastward from the castle at 2 leisurely rows, and at the back of the dwelling, steep inclines plunged down into the pastures into the north and south. These slopes were divided into sections called tenements, or enclosures, a word later shortened to close. The enclosures were carefully tended and provided the settlements for land for growth crops and grass for common grazing. In later times, however, the pastoral idyll would completely disappear, and the term close would take a far more unpleasant connotation. At this stage, the High Street bore no resemblance to the monstrosity that it would become, and as yet none of the thatched houses even reached 20 feet high. But years passed and the town began to increase in size and importance. Early in the 12th century, the first signs of Edinburgh was a royal city are found, and despite the hardships of medieval times, the population continued to grow. It was still a pleasant place to live apparently, and the Frosiart, visiting in 1384, called Edinburgh the Paris of Scotland. In 1450, the Scottish and English armies clashed at the Battle of Sark, and for a change the Scots won. In case this victory goaded the enemy into yet another invasion, it was decided to build a defensive wall around the city, and it was felt that Edinburgh was too close to the English border for comfort. James II of Scotland granted a petition for the city burgesses to begin construction. By this charter, they were free to fosse, bulwark, walk, tour, curate, and otherwise strengthen the burg, but only in what manner of wise and degree that beast mayst spectiful to the provost of Edinburgh. The city wall ran from the foot of Castle Rock up the slope and encompassed upper part of the Royal Mile. As an extra defence to the north pastures, which today form Princess Street Gardens, were flooded and became the North Loch. The loch and wall may have made Edinburgh easier to defend, but it also limited the area into which a steadily rising population could expand, and suddenly overcrowding became a problem. Protocol books written in the city notaries show that building control in the old days was fairly non-existent. In 1500, protocol books by John Fowler show the ground within the wall rapidly becoming covered by tall buildings. These buildings were known as lands, now more commonly known as tenements, and grew at an average 10 or even 11 stories. One block in Parliament Square reached the dizzying heights of 14 stories. Since space was at a premium, advantages were also taken of the soft sandstone. As the buildings of the old Edinburgh were erected higher and higher, the foundations became deeper and countless cellars were created. The steep slope on each side of the High Street meant that these foundations and cellars didn't necessarily have to be excavated from above. Builders could dig sideways into the ridge, allowing underground levels to be built at a depth that would not have been possible in any other location. This geographical defiant creation really was an unusual base on which to build the city. In many ways, the foundations of the tenements resembled a rabbit warren, and the cellars were more like caves slotted into the hillside. Though open at one end, the further into the hillside they went, the further under the main buildings they were. And because of the steepness of the side of the crag and the tail, levels of the cellar could be built one above the other. But though these excavations were sideways rather than straight down, they were just as dark, wet and cold. This was the start of the underground city.